Good afternoon to you. Well, you know as well as I do how difficult it is for so many millions of people around the world to get vaccines against COVID-19. You and I live on the continent where millions of people are not yet vaccinated, and there's no chance that their governments will be able to help them get a vaccination in the near future. One of the key problems to this is cost. Pharmaceutical companies in the rich world are opposing a waiver at the World Trade Organization that would allow these countries to get cheaper vaccines and thus to save millions of lives. One person who is opposed to this, who's supporting a World Trade Organization waiver for these vaccines, is the Nobel Prize-winning economist, Professor Joseph Stiglitz. He joins us now from the US. Professor Stiglitz, good day to you, sir, and thank you for your time on Newzroom Afrika. Firstly, why do you have such strong views on this waiver? Why do you believe it's so important for the World Trade Organization to grant this waiver?
Well, as you pointed out, in the developing world, literally billions of people have not been able to get access to the vaccine. It's unfair. It's a kind of described as vaccine apartheid. But it's actually very foolish even for the advanced countries, because as long as the disease continues to ravage large parts of the world, there is the chance, maybe the likelihood, of a mutation that will be more infectious, more deadly, or more vaccine resistant. And so it's even in the interest of those in the advanced countries that everybody in the world be vaccinated. So what is the essential problem? Right now, the essential problem is lack of supply. And then you ask the question, why is there a lack of supply? Is there a shortage in materials, the materials that go into making a vaccine, the syringes or the glass vials or whatever it takes to make the vaccine? The answer is clearly, if you believe in markets, the market can produce everything that goes into the vaccine. But there's one constraint, and that is the legal constraint of the intellectual property. The market can't solve that because that is imposed outside the market. So the question is, if we are going to have greater supply of vaccines, we have to change the intellectual property framework. Now you have to understand the incentives of the pharmaceutical companies are antithetical to the interest of the rest of the world. Their interest is in making profits. And to make profits, you have to keep the supply limited. If the supply is limited, the price will be high, and they will make an enormous amount of profits. One of the most successful pharmaceutical companies was planning to charge as much as $175 a dose. They could only get away with that if the supply of the vaccine is very limited. So we have a conflict here between the interests of the world, everybody in the advanced countries and in the developing world, and the interests of the pharmaceutical companies. And it is imperative that we make access to this intellectual property for firms. There are firms in South Africa, firms in India, firms in many other countries around the world that have the capacity to produce more of the vaccine. So it may not fully solve the problem, but it would be a big step in the right direction.
So, I mean, I hear the argument. I mean, it's hard to argue against what you're saying. But would it mean that vaccines automatically become much cheaper? I mean, a vaccine in South Africa is probably costing the South African government around 250 South African rand, so in dollars, that's maybe $25, $30. I mean, how much cheaper would a waiver actually make it? And I mean, I realize that even 10% cheaper might be quite a lot for some countries.
Yeah. The fact is that if the supply were increased, it's just the law of demand and supply, the actual cost of production is very limited. We saw that, this issue of availability was an issue that was faced 20 years ago, in the context of the HIV epidemic. The principle that in the event of a pandemic, an epidemic, that access to intellectual property would be increased has already been accepted through the principle of compulsory licenses. But the drug companies have excelled in learning how to drag their feet. By dragging their feet, they keep the period of high prices longer, and that means they make more profits. But we're in the midst of a pandemic which is having an enormous toll on people and on the global economy. And so it is imperative that there's an urgency here where we can't take the years that it would take to go through product by product, country by country, in the issuance of compulsory licenses. And that's what the waiver at the WTO is about. It's not changing the legal framework, it's speeding the process in response to the urgency of the situation caused by COVID-19.
One of the arguments the pharmaceutical companies make, and I know you've seen this argument, everyone has, they say it will stifle innovation. It will, the profit motive is around giving them enough money to encourage innovation. How do you deal with that argument?
Well, let me say, it's nonsense. First of all, most of the money for the development of these new vaccines was provided by government. The basic research was done, provided by the U.S. government, or researchers a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania on the development of the idea of mRNA vaccines. And then going from the general theory, general principles, to the development of these products, the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, the governments, not only in the United States, but in Germany and other countries, provided literally billions of dollars. And the amount of the private sector money is just a small fraction of the total amount that's been spent. But already the drug companies have gotten a return, of well above what they put in. And the issue here is not whether they get an adequate return. The question is, should they get maybe 1,000% return or 100,000% return on their investment? They are being very well compensated for the returns on this investment. And so I think there's absolutely no risk that they would be discouraged from making innovations if another kind of virus appeared and it were necessary to devise a new vaccine in response to that new drug. The issue here is whether it should be an outlandish return or just a very, very large return.
Professor, we must talk about the economic problems of the pandemic, and particularly the economic problems that South Africa has. We've got over 12 million people who are unemployed. Over 9 million of those people are what we call young people here, so under the age of 30, 35. We've got huge racialized inequality. It's a massive, massive problem. Where do you believe we need, as South Africa, to start to create jobs? There's a huge amount of work to do here.
Well, I think the point you made is a good one. There are people who want to work, and there are jobs that need to be done. South Africa, as you know, needs to make massive investments in energy, in response to climate change, in infrastructure, in housing. And so the challenge is, how do you bring together the jobs that need to be done and the workers who want to do them? Part of the answer, obviously, is that upskilling, making sure that the workers have the skills necessary. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. Making sure that there's the finance, that those who are able and willing to take the risk of starting a new business can do that. There needs to be government support and organizing, for instance, some housing projects. The way I think about it is that it needs to really be a very comprehensive agenda. In much of the years after the end of apartheid, the focus was on of the government was on gaining respectability, confidence in international markets. I think right now the focus needs to be more on exactly the issues that you described. How do we marry together the problem and use the instruments of government, the fact that there are all these workers who want to work and all these jobs that need to be done, and yet there are still scarcity of resources. That's the basic economic issue. And how do we use those limited amount of scarce capital, for instance, to use it in ways that are most focused on creating the jobs that people want and meeting the needs that the South African society needs to address.
One of the aspects of the problems that we have is that this is actually a regionalized issue. So, I mean, we as South Africans talk about the South African problem all the time, but we have a very high rate of unemployment, and particularly youth unemployment. But so do our neighbors, Zimbabwe, Eswatini, Namibia, Botswana. What does this tell us about the problem that we have? I mean, in a way, it tells us that we live in a regionalized economy, perhaps with regionalized problems.
Yes, and it also says that the problems are not just those of your political leaders. They are more general problems. And let me give you one example of what I see as the part of the underlying problem, that much of the innovation, developments of new technology are focused on, occur in the advanced countries. We've been talking, for instance, about the vaccines, but it's also true in every other aspect of manufacturing, for instance. And the innovations that occur are focused on saving labor, including unskilled labor, that is in absolute abundance in Africa, in South Africa, in Southern Africa. What we really need to do is to have innovation, steer innovation to save the planet, to deal with climate change, and to focus more on saving capital, which is one of the scarce resources in Africa. So it is really thinking about how perhaps Africa working together can focus more on steering innovation to address the scarcities that are central to the problems in the region.
I mean, what you're pointing to is the great fear that South Africa's problems, Southern Africa's unemployment problems, could actually get worse because of the fourth industrial revolution and because young people are not being given skills at school. I mean, I'll suggest they've been betrayed by our education system. What I'm saying is the problem that we have now, which is very bad, could actually get worse.
I've been very worried about that, and I've been actually writing about that. I've been worried that the innovations that are occurring will reduce the demand for the assets that are key to prosperity in Africa. The key assets are, that Africa is more abundant in is unskilled labor, or even, mildly skilled labor, young labor. Much of our innovation is replacing labor with machines, replacing even natural resources, which Africa is are abundant in, and replacing those with the figuring out ways of using those more efficiently. So the value of the assets, which have been central to the progress in Africa in recent decades, will be going down. And at the same time, what was key to success of development in East Asia, which was the export-led manufacturing, export-led growth model, with manufacturing globally, employment in manufacturing going down, there will be less scope for that to be at the center of the development strategy. Those two things coming together may make the problems in Africa, even the problems of development and the problems of unemployment and problems of inequality, even greater. And then you put on top of that the way that climate change may be particularly adversely affect the region, one becomes very worried. And that suggests even more the need for regional cooperation and thinking about development of strategies together, strategies of steering innovation, regional cooperation, and rethinking the principles of globalization in ways that can help stimulate growth and employment in Africa.
Professor Joseph Stiglitz, sir, thank you very much indeed for your time